You know, integration requires a lot of prototyping and debugging, and we need a convenient, simple way to run people code. Now, in our first session, we used an app engine, and it works, it runs local, which is nice, but it does have its quirks. Like, for example, there's line length limitations on the output. So I had an idea. How about just putting together a simple page with a run button and seeing some output? And then we could put some code behind that button, press the button, and then view the results. So here's the page. I want to show it to you. I put this page together and we can see that it does have a button here. And so let's go back to the code editor and let's do a quick hello world just to show it working. So we're going to need a log.write. Hello. And then a log.write world. And let's save it and then we'll run it. And that's great, perfect. Okay, so let's do this. Let's grab one of our integrations from before the break. Let's see, we had this one here where we fetch an employee, and let's retrofit that. Let's put that into our little test runner here. And of course, we need to make a couple of changes, like for example, no longer outputting to message box, although that would work, see, because we are running in the context of a component. So a message box would work just fine, but I think it would look nicer if we write it out to that nice little output window there. Okay, let's run it. And it is going out to another service, and awesome, we get some JSON back. That's great, isn't it? So here's a question. What is JSON? JSON is an acronym for JavaScript Object Notation. Basically, if I were to define an object in JavaScript, this is the code I would write. Actually, I got an idea. Let's do that. Let's define an object in JavaScript really quickly. So I'm going to open the browser console, Control-Shift-I, and let's define a person. So var person. Now, objects are noted by curly braces. So let's do that. Equals, and we'll put our curly braces in here. And then an object usually has some properties, or attributes. So I'm going to add, how about ID? And how about KU0007? Now, in the PeopleSoft demo data, that would be, we'll give it a name here, Betty Lockerty. And yeah, let's just go ahead and hit the Enter key. So we've defined a person here, and we can view the person. Perfect. Now, a true JavaScript object might have methods as well, but JavaScript object notation would not. Now, a key difference between JSON and plain JavaScript is that JSON is much more strict. JavaScript, for example, allows for bare words here for properties, but JSON requires properties to be quoted. So that would look like this. I'll just put quotes around each of these items. So this right here would be valid JavaScript object notation, the content inside the curly braces, whereas the information up above is fine for defining an object when you're writing JavaScript, but it would not validate for true JavaScript object notation. Now, a property for an object might be a sub or nested object, or a property might be a primitive, such as a number, string, or a Boolean value. Or here's an interesting question. What about a date? See, a date is a complex object. Could you model a date in JavaScript? Can you put date objects in JavaScript object notation? Well, the short answer is yes, but the format is subject to interpretation. Some APIs use the number of milliseconds since the epoch, and some use the ISO format, or perhaps some derivative thereof, choosing to store dates as strings. Now, a property might also be an array of primitives or an array of objects. So now here's a key difference between JSON and XML. XML always has a root node and only one root node. JSON does not have that concept. A JSON document might represent an object noted by curly braces, or it might contain an array noted by square brackets. Let me demonstrate an array. How about an array of names? So let's create our opening bracket here, and then, how about Betty Lockerty and Rosanna Channing and Vicky Zin. Again, all PeopleSoft demo users within the POM or demo images. So a JSON array could be simple like this, being passed back as an a REST response, or it could be more complicated like the one we received back from the employee service where we received an array of nested JavaScript objects. So if JSON is JavaScript, can I use it to natively create JavaScript object? That's a great question. Let's try it. Let's grab this JSON up here. And let's see, we have a person. How about we create an employee? And we'll just put this in the console, employee equals, and then hit the enter key. It looks like it parsed okay. Sure enough, there's our employee object. So that's great. But what about PeopleSoft? How do you work with JSON from PeopleCode? Now, we actually have several options, and we wrote a blog post about it. Actually, we'll be sure to send that blog post out to you later. Now, I can't say one method is better than the other. Each has its quirks. For example, my favorite is the org.json Java classes because they're complete, nearly bulletproof, and work with any PeopleTools release. But the Java context switching takes a performance hit. And speaking of performance, the PeopleCode native JSON classes are the fastest, but may not be the most stable and often require odd workarounds, such as null handling, which we'll talk about later. And another method is the documents module, which is effective and easy to model, but isn't as flexible and may suffer from a cache bug. So here's a question. If JSON is native to JavaScript, can you somehow use JavaScript in your PeopleCode to parse and process JSON? Actually, yes, you can. You can even invoke SQL exec and work with row sets and records from JavaScript running in the app server. In fact, that's likely the most flexible and most accurate, but may, again, have a performance impact because of context switching between PeopleCode to Java to JavaScript and back again. Actually, we have several blog posts on that topic, and we'll be sure to share those as well. Those blog posts show how to generate a JSON array from a SQL cursor, they use SQL exec, and so on. So to summarize, and you may actually want to write these down, JSON options include the documents module, native JSON, Java libraries such as org.json or json.simple, and JavaScript. Actually, there's another option, and that is pure PeopleCode. I know consultants that have written their own JSON classes in pure PeopleCode. Now, here's a question. Which one should you use? And the answer is, well, it depends. I think we need a decision matrix for this. And I'll start from the top, the more recent PeopleTools releases. First, are you using PeopleTools 8.5 or later? Then your options are unlimited because we have the native JSON classes. But if you're on 8.5.4 or earlier, we didn't have those native JSON classes. So your options are much more limited to documents, Java, etc. Are you using 8.5.2 or earlier? Then you may want to choose a pure Java or a pure PeopleCode alternative because documents didn't support JSON until 8.5.3. Do you have specific structure requirements? Then documents may be out because documents have their own structure requirements, get this, dictated by XML, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Now, here's something I think is interesting. Documents released, the document support, documents release support for JSON in 8.5.3. In 8.5.5, PeopleTools switched to Elasticsearch. So 8.5.3 documents start supporting JSON. 8.5.5 brings Elastic. And all Elastic integrations are JSON.